Hi, hello, everybody. Today we have a really exciting guest on the show today. We have Dr. Gury Doshi. Dr. Doshi is a practicing hematologist, oncologist, and a medical director at Texas Oncology's West Houston region, where she leads cancer care across 2 major centers and treats a wide range of cancer and blood disorders. She's also the chair of US Oncology's P&T, or Pharmaceutical and Therapeutics Committee, where she helps guide treatment decisions across one of the largest cancer networks in the country. She was also the former assistant professor at UT Health in Houston, and she was recognized with awards like the US Oncology Research Rising Star and the Houstonia Top Doctor. Dr. Doshi played an immensely critical role in launching one of the largest deployments of AI in oncology, leading the initial launch of DeepScribe at Texas Oncology, where it's scaled to hundreds of clinicians today. And finally, on a personal note, Dr. Doshi is just a very close personal friend of mine, and we have had countless long-spirited conversations about how AI could transform cancer care. And so with that, Dr. Doshi, welcome to the show, and I can't wait to dive into the conversation.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to the DeepScribe team and the podcast team for having me. I look forward to our conversation, as I always.
So Dr. Doshi, like in a lot of the conversations that we've had, one thing that really stood out to me was, your and Texas Oncology's really unique approach to cancer care. So I was wondering if we can start there, if you can just share with me, what is your kind of personal approach and what makes Texas Oncology's approach kind of different than the normal course of care?
So Matt, our story goes really back to our origin story of Texas Oncology. So our founder, Dr. Mike Reese, in the 1980s really was a very forward-thinking clinician. And when he was practicing with a group of other 15 medical oncologists that are really the founding group of Texas Oncology, they recognized that cancer care was transitioning from a hospital-based system to really outpatient types of treatment. And they knew that this was the wave of the future, that we needed to meet patients where they are, and therefore really set apart Texas Oncology as a community oncology practice where we provide high quality, evidence-based cancer care close to home. So that was our founding mission. We've always been forward thinking. Innovation is in our DNA. As our current CEO, Dr. Paulson, likes to say, we're pioneers, not settlers. And so it's really with that mindset of meeting patients where they are, of taking care of patients close to home, that all of our decisions of doing the right things for patients, for ourselves, and for our community, that's the spirit in which our practice is really unique.
And that's awesome. I think in all the interactions that I've had with you and your team, I feel that spirit shine through it like very deeply in, all the conversations and decisions that we've made. And it's really awesome to see how, an organization like yours that, has that, ethos has grown to, the size and scale that it is today, and is able to touch so many lives and make such an incredible impact. But, I think in part of the conversations that we've had, we spend a lot of our time thinking and talking about, the challenges that we see. And so, I think when we work with, your organization at your size and scale, I think you guys have a really unique perspective on what are some of the biggest challenges that, cancer patients are seeing today. And I was wondering if you can share some of the kind of biggest challenges you see with not only inpatient care, but also, from a provider standpoint, actually administering the care as well.
Yeah, that's a really wonderfully robust question in terms of how we think about cancer care today and then our challenges. I will say you're right. We do have a great size and scale. We are Texas Oncology, almost 600 physicians. We deliver cancer care across 300 sites in Texas. we take care of more than half of Texans with cancer. So we certainly are very, very well versed as to not only the current state, but, what are some of the headwinds that we face? This can be divided up into, making sure that patients have access to care. And that's really always at the front and foremost of our conversation. And then how do we continue to deliver that best care, be it from a public policy standpoint of making sure that we have site parity and payments that actually, take care of the care that's being delivered. That, 70 to 80% of cancer care is delivered in the community. And so I think people don't recognize that not everyone's going to a big academic center. It's just not possible, nor do we think that that's where most care should be delivered, right? When patients have cancer, they want to be close to home and be surrounded by their family and loved ones in a comfortable environment. And so from healthcare policy, regulatory laws, to patient access, to medications, to identifying social determinants of health, and how do we really truly support patients going through this cancer care journey? How do we deliver that best care? How do we do so in an environment that makes sense in terms of business operations, safety, and essentially, continue to provide care that not only serves patients for today, but what about the identifying and developing treatments for tomorrow, right? So we also look at research and clinical trial enrollment and really making sure that there are better cancer therapies for patients in the coming years. So this is kind of some of the way in which we look at the oncology landscape. And then with our introduction to DeepScribe and what we have done with you all is really looking at how do we use technology to deliver on that mission of best patient care.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first learned that 70%, 80% of cancer care is actually delivered in the community setting, that really shocked me. And, with that comes with like a host of different problems in these two very different settings. And, just to kind of expand on that, like, I'm curious where you think those problems are changing, right? Like in terms of, as cancer care is evolving, as there's new drugs, new innovations that hit the market, how do you think really like the landscape of community oncology versus academics, how is that changing? Like, do you see that 80% growing, or do you see, the need for the cancer care to be, more administered through an academic setting?
No, I truly believe that community oncology is where patients live and where they should receive their care. And I definitely advocate for being able to enhance those services and really make sure that we're able to continue to survive in community oncology to take best care of patients, right? So we're never going to change where patients live and where they should be able to receive their care. We need to continue to put in place regulations and be able to defend the ability for community oncology practices to take care of their patients. So, for instance, when we talk about the way that cancer care is shifting and the shifting demographics of the population, right? We know that this is where patients live. They live in all across America. We are part of a US Oncology Network where practices such as Texas Oncology, really community oncology practices, are present in, we have presence in about 31 out of the 50 states. So what we're doing is continuing to put in place programs that help support patients having access to best-in-class cancer care. What is also top of mind which is the reason that we all started to work together, was also supporting the physicians and the clinicians that are providing that cancer care, right? So we've talked about where the patients live, and now talking about supporting community oncology. And let's talk about supporting the clinician. And what we were finding is that there were high rates of burnout because of the administrative burden that we were continuing to see grow over time, right? And so that's when we started to reach out and say, what can we do to help decrease that administrative burden? And the number one thing is the EHR, right? The electronic health record has been really something that has increasingly consumed more time and posed an administrative burden, such that it's now the number one cause of physician burnout. So when we look at a limited supply of physicians, an ever-growing population of cancer patients, how do we alleviate that burden? And that's where we did start working with you and DeepScribe to see if we could impact that. So that was our entry into using technology to really save clinicians time from doing this administrative and clerical work, and really open up some of our time and attention back onto that patient care, that patient-clinician relationship. So these are some of the things that we're now looking at in terms of, on a broader scale, of improving cancer care delivery.
Yeah, it's crazy because I would say, when we started our journey together 2 years ago, like building an ambient solution in oncology specifically almost seemed like an insurmountable task from where we started. And to look back from where we stand today, it is really awesome to see kind of all the progress that we made. I was wondering, we worked together on a paper that we presented at ASCO together to talk about some of the real world kind of impacts that we're seeing with this technology. I was curious if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing the work that we did, and what are the actual measurable impacts that we can see with kind of AI.
Well, you jumped right into what are the measurable impacts, right? But why don't we take a step back and really talk about, because I think origin stories, or how we began, it really does set the tone for things that follow. So if you wouldn't mind, would you share with our guests, what your take and how you really set upon, identifying a problem and going about, the solution? I mean, you have a personal story as well in terms of tying it to what we're about to talk about, which is ambient AI use in the oncology space.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Yeah, I mean, for those of you that don't know, my journey with DeepScribe really started with my mom. My mom had breast cancer, and I was serving as her care coordinator. She doesn't speak English that well, and I was mainly serving as her translator. And we have this joke at DeepScribe that, all of this started when my mom asked me if I was lying to her about what I was translating. And that really set me off to become, what I would characterize as an evil patient. I would come up with 100 reasons why my mom's oncologist was, just the worst human being alive. And it wasn't really until I spoke to my friend's father, who is a practicing oncologist, and he started to share with me all of the things that an oncologist needs to do once the patient leaves the room. And, as a patient, what I would say is that you're going through a very traumatic moment in your life. And, you expect the love and the attention to feel like you're at the center of the universe and the world revolves around you. But what you don't see is that oncologist that is treating you is seeing 20 other patients that day. And they're managing the care for, thousands of cancer patients throughout the entire year. And not only that, when that oncologist leaves the office, they're spending a lot of their time where they should be spending with their family and their loved ones, but writing notes and doing a lot of this clerical administrative tasks that is not really visible to the everyday patient. And when we learned about kind of all these other tasks, that's when we saw an opportunity to apply some of the research that my co-founder was doing at the Berkeley AI Research Lab to this problem, and out came DeepScribe. But what really, I think, intrigued us about this problem was not just the fact that we can make such a tremendous impact on the providers' lives, but as our backgrounds as data scientists, what we really saw was this immense potential to not only improve, for example, health equity, right? We really believe that we could take this information from these conversations and use it in a way that can actually improve patient outcomes. And so really like our goal, and I think our partnership with Texas Oncology has really helped us do, is not only demonstrate the fact that there are real practical, use cases for AI to address a lot of these administrative, tasks and provider burnout, but there's a whole other suite of applications and this, this future where, we really believe that these conversations can be the strategic asset that really changes the way cancer care is delivered. And so, that was my story, right? And I think the reason why we've been such good partners is because we both are philosophically aligned on the mission of what we're trying to do. And, it's really awesome to see, the technology that once started 2 years ago as something that people thought was science fiction to now, people are really viewing as part of the standard of care in medicine. And so, that journey was a long one, quite frankly.
Yes.
And, but I would say maybe something that would be useful for the listeners is to maybe share what that journey looked like for Texas Oncology in terms of viewing this as just an innovative technology to actually finally, coming around and saying, hey, not only is this used for solving provider burnout, but really seeing this as an opportunity to change the way, patient care is delivered.
So when we met in 2023, it was under that problem solving I was sitting, and this is a story that you all have heard time and time again. And it's a little uncanny how it's the same story, right? Of clinicians outside of work in the evening, what's now been, called pajama time, right? So in your pajamas, trying to finish this documentation that you have from the patients that you've seen that day. And that administrative burden just continues to pile up. But that was the entree for reaching out and really starting to work with DeepScribe. What we realized was that we had a starting point together. And what was wonderful is that you all came and worked side by side with us in clinic. And then what spiraled from there was, what else can we do to customize and really alleviate that workload? And so what we found was that ambient AI scribing technology really helped to alleviate our cognitive workload that we hadn't even fully, named or acknowledged, Matt, that existed during the day, during that patient-physician encounter. And so here we are, DeepScribe's helping us not only to capture the conversation and the elements, but then you also customized it for, well, we're a multidisciplinary group. What the medical oncologist needs is different from what the surgeon needs, is different from, what the radiation oncologist needs. So that ability to use that technology to customize the elements of the interaction to meet the needs of that physician was something that we hadn't recognized, but continued to work on with you all. And then what I found really interesting was I feel like I pride myself that I have this ability to communicate and really be present in the interaction with my patients. But after starting to use this technology, my patients really said, it's so nice, Dr. Doshi, that you're not sitting by the computer. You're actually sitting right in front of me, and you've moved away from that computer screen. Before, you were kind of pivoting between computer screen and seeing us. And that really struck me, Matt, because there is nothing more sacred than that patient clinician relationship. And cancer patients are going through the toughest journey of their lives, and they deserve to have the unrivaled attention of their physicians. Now, we were doing that because we really were trying to make sure that we had all of this data right in front of us to be able to guide us in those conversations, right? We had their past history, their lab reports, their pathology reports. So it was this natural consequence of here's their electronic health record in front of you. And then here we are interacting with patients. So we took these interactions, and what we learned was not only are we more present with the patients, but that after we left the room, we then did not have an immense amount of work to document that interaction. And so as a result, we really were able to be better physicians for our patients and make sure that in that way that they were getting better care. After that, we continued to work with you all that if this is where we're starting from, right? And to the question you asked before, what impact did we see across our physicians? Well, when we asked our physicians the amount of time saved by using DeepScribe in this technology, the average was 3.5 hours a week of giving our clinicians time back. But where that time was spent was so impactful, Matt. I mean, we had stories of I can get to my child's school and pick them up on time. Like I'm not paying overage on my kids, daycare. One surgeon said that he was getting home earlier and that his wife really didn't know what to do with him, that he showed up at 6 p.m. as opposed to later hours. So those are the stories that, really meant something to us. We want to make sure that not only do our patients get the best care, but really what we called our get home in time for dinner, initiative or campaign. And so those are real stories. And I bring that up because as we're using this technology, right? I mean, in 2025 now, fast forward, people are saying, well, how do you use this technology? And then there's this cautious optimism, skepticism of, is technology going to replace humans? Or is it going to how is it going to impact how we as humans interact with each other? And our lived experience at Texas Oncology has really been that it enhances our human to human interaction. And these are some of the early ways in which we've seen that happen. Additionally, going forward, we just want to continue taking that clerical burden off of our physicians. We want everyone to practice at the top of their license. So whether that's documenting specific diagnoses codes related to the acuity of the patient's illness, to documenting what the billing code should be, all of these clerical types of things, those seem like a really obvious place where we should just continue to adopt and move forward. I'm more excited about once we get beyond that clerical, documentation piece. What else can we really, really do with this? And that's the place where I get excited. So for us, what is really, really paramount as an oncologist is we have drugs right now for patients, our medications, and we always pride ourselves as the right patient, the right medication at the right dose at the right time. How do we ensure we can push forward with that? How do we innovate and make sure that we can continue to deliver those new medications? We haven't cured cancer yet, but that is our goal. And so how do we work towards that goal? So where do we use this technology? So I really think that as we're trying to make sure that we can develop those cures for patients, right now, Matt, drug development takes about 7 to 10 years from the time where a molecule is identified, designed, all the way through clinical trials, results, FDA regulations, and then approval. That process is 7 to 10 years, and it is a very expensive process. We know that patients deserve better. We know that clinical trials are a wonderful option for them to have new and better therapies. So I think that where I would like us to see accelerate this process is clinical trial design, really looking at our real world patients and seeing how they are served by a clinical trial design that works on the real world patient as opposed to the ideal patient, which is what historically our clinical trial protocols use as inclusion criteria. So how do we look at that data? How do we design trials that include our real world patients? And then in those encounters, how do we make sure that we get patients onto trial? Clinical trial enrollment and matching can be enhanced through this process. And if we're doing all of that, we're also gathering data on the properties of those molecules, right? And how are we going to be smarter in design based on the feedback of these patients that are on clinical trials? So I like to really frame this up as clinical intelligence, right? So using the technology, harnessing all of the technology to bring this data together to really put together the clinical intelligence piece that then accelerates drug development and therapeutic solutions for cancer patients. So to me, this is where we're going next and where we need to start focusing.
That's awesome. And I think we spent a lot of time just talking about what, dream big, what this can really look like. And I think there's things that we talked about where we can use AI to match patients to clinical trials based off their inclusion exclusion criteria. And there's also, what I think is more interesting is aside from the application layer and automating work that we know is, tedious today, there's this idea that on the data layer, there is, with these conversations, a much more complete picture of the patient and much more complete picture of the patient's journey. And I was wondering, what do you think is available in these conversations that may not actually make it to, say, a lab result or the EHR or the clinical record that you think could really transform our understanding of cancer and how we deliver it?
I really appreciate that question, right? So what is the unseen data, right? That's so relevant. And I think it speaks to the heart of personalized medicine. That's what you're truly asking about here. That's how I look at it. And not personalized medicine in the way that we've known it to be, right? Which is, again, always describing what is the unique cancer characteristic of the patients, right? The patient's cancer. We've focused on the patient's cancer, but what you're asking about is let's focus on the patient. And so the elements of that patient journey, the pearls that really you all have captured and I see captured are elements of their social history. So this is beyond just social determinants of health, Matt. Yes, we can look at zip codes. Yes, we can look at socioeconomic status. Yes, we can look at employment history and kind of put together pieces. But the pieces that we're not putting together are the emotional pieces, the pieces of, is this person a mom? What age are her kids? What really is her concern, right? Is it the breast cancer that she has, or is it the impact of the adverse effects on her ability to mother her children? Will she be able to be feeling energetic enough to take care of them when they get home from school? So we pick up pieces of their social history. We pick up pieces of what matters to them. And that's essential to the patient's quality of life. What motivates you as a patient? What do you consider as good quality of life? These are discussions that we have all the time. when a patient has an incurable cancer and I'm in the position of talking to them about data on quantity of life versus, and we have that data in our evidence-based trials and we understand exactly how to frame that conversation in terms of therapeutic selection and what they can expect. But where are we in speaking about their quality of life, not just the quantity? So AI and technology has the ability to pick up the 360-degree view of what that patient is experiencing. And it helps us to better support patients in that journey. If they have children, they can't have an afternoon appointment, right? They've got to get that 9 a.m. appointment. And wouldn't that be wonderful for us to say, okay, here we are. This is where we have to take care of this patient so that they can get in, get out, get the treatment they need, and move on with their life. Because that's what we want them to do. We want them to have a wonderful, high quality life on that cancer journey. We want to be able to support them. The other part that we never consider is the caregiver, right? And so what you're picking up in those conversations is not just the voice of the patient, but you're picking up that conversation and that interaction between the caregiver that's sitting next to the patient and then the patient. And oftentimes, Matt, we learn a lot of history from the caregiver, right? And so what they're truly experiencing at home, what are the side effects? How are they coping? How do we support this? What is the health literacy? From the questions they're asking, we can deduce that. What is the level of anxiety and stress that they're undergoing, right? So I think that you all have started to see some of that in your technology. I don't know if you want to speak to some of that in terms of, measuring the emotional components through this technology. Maybe our listeners don't know about some of that. And would you want to add your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think everything that you said just really deeply resonates with me because, I think in my experience as a care coordinator for my mom, what she really cared about was, someone to hold her hand, look her in the eye and tell her that she's going to be okay. Right. And someone to really work through the quality of life things rather than just figuring out what the evidence-based treatment is and walking them through, handouts that, you can read online. And, I think it really redefines kind of the way we define what care means as both from a very human level. But in terms of the data, what I would say really interests me is there are things that are like human interpretable, right? So there are things that you can pull from a conversation that's, if there are hints that the patient might have trouble accessing transportation. There are hints that they're really more concerned about mothering their children rather than extending their life. A lot of these things that you can interpret through what people are saying. But what's really interesting also is this new dimension of the non-human interpretable data, which what I would characterize as how people are actually saying these things, right? When they say they're okay, do they really mean that they're okay? I have a joke that I tell people is like, I have a really low pain tolerance. And so when someone tells me on a scale of 1 to 10, how badly does it hurt? I would always say something between a 9 and a 10. But it's really interesting. Can you really understand the quality of pain through someone's voice, right? Can you understand, neurodegenerative diseases through biomarkers in their voice? And what research is finding is that there are a lot of interesting, research around being able to predict neurodegenerative diseases through biomarkers in one's voice. And I think what it really starts to paint a picture is you really widen the aperture of the understanding of people, not only through the interpretability of what they're saying, but also how they're saying it. And with this data, we can finally start making progress into, picking the pieces and saying, how can we actually provide care that we can't even fathom today? And that's what's really exciting. Yeah. So I think the elephant in the room here is in order to actually get to that reality that we dream about, we have to get people to actually adopt the technology in the first place and really view recording these conversations as part of the standard of care. And I know over, our implementation at Texas Oncology, we've had a lot of success implementing the solution. And I think it would be really beneficial for all the listeners if we can kind of dive into some of the strategies and things that you kind of saw worked or didn't work in terms of getting people to actually adopt AI or ambient AI.
I think we have this leadership excitement and, drive towards innovation. So I think it starts there, right? So from the Texas Oncology leadership level of identifying a problem and then tackling this with, okay, we're going to approach this with, ambient AI technology. So let's figure this out. So from our perspective, it's who is the best partner and let's meet up with them. And for us, that happened to be DeepScribe. And the elements that were important to us were whose ethos matches ours, who has that same mission of making sure that the patient-clinician interaction and patient care is supreme and central. Secondly, we're embarking on this new technology, which we all are still learning about. So how are we going to use and deploy AI responsibly? So these are some of those initial questions and hurdles that organizations have to approach and sort through. And for us, that partnership with you all, we really did see that, our mission and our drive was synonymous. And therefore, it's a great partnership. And so once we start working with partners, it's important that we have good communication and we're working together. The important thing here was having you all side by side with us so that you're developing a solution together that really mimics our day-to-day workflow, right? And so you are essentially seeing what our pain points were, and we were able to develop solutions that really helped our docs because they didn't antagonize our workflow. They really were kind of ambient, essentially. And then where we came up with challenges like, okay, it's working for our medical oncologists, but it's really not working for our surgeons. So how do we iterate and how do we improve this product to drive adoption? The clarity of our purpose and our mission, I think, really helped guide this. The fact that you all knew that you can't drive adoption through brute force. You have to drive adoption because you are best in class. And that is something that we believe at Texas Oncology. You've got to innovate. You've got to keep working at it. You've got to improve and you've got to be best in class. And that's how I think we have really kind of ridden that change management curve. Now, in any organization, Matt, you're going to have your wave of early adopters that are excited and ready to embrace this. You've got to have your hesitant guys that are going to wait for the first wave to go through and very astutely pick up on the learnings. And then we've got, some late stragglers like everybody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that my advice is to organically work within those cohorts that you have. And with time and with understanding of how you're using that technology and how you're improving and iterating on that solution, you will then figure out a way that feels right in your organization. I've enjoyed the fact that we have a great partner in you all, and we've had that great communication. And so to me, that's really, really important. I think it's a big reason for our success is that open communication. But if you don't focus on really making sure that this solution, this tech solution is serving your organization's needs, then you're going to be in a dilemma of how do we really get docs to adopt this.
Yeah, I think that's spot on in terms of what I've seen as well, not only at Texas Oncology, but in all of the other implementations that we've done. One of the hardest things that I had to wrap my mind around was, as a technologist, was like the best technology does not actually win in healthcare, right? You need so many more dimensions of the product that include like, what does change management look like? What does governance look like? How do you identify the right champions to champion the product? How do you identify, who are the physicians with the loudest voice and with the most respect that if you get them over the line, other people will follow. And there's so much nuance in it that I think is so much beyond just building technology. And, to your point, it comes down to having a really strong kind of philosophical alignment about what are we trying to accomplish here, and finding the right partners to iterate on this, what I would say a decades long journey together. And
it's also part of boldly going where no one's gone before and being okay with that, right? And then really regrouping. So we also, you were brave and courageous enough, and so were we, that we sat down and said, okay, who's not adopting and why are they not? And then how do we look at what this challenge and opportunity is? And then how do we solve that? And so all of this is where we are now in 2025 together. And I think that it really speaks to continuing to use this technology to improve where we are, and where that is different in 2025 as opposed to 18 months ago. The space is evolving so rapidly, and it's very exciting. And we look forward to continuing to improve solutions for improving patient care.
Yeah. We're so happy to be blessed to work with you guys. And, I would say the change and the impact that we're making on, the millions of patients that Texas Oncology sees, it's a really rewarding experience. And to know that it's only in the early innings and there's so much we have on our minds in terms of where this technology can go. It's just really exciting to be able to see how this plays out. Well, anyways, Dr. Doshi, with that, I want to thank you so much again for being the first guest on our podcast and being such an awesome partner to not only Describe, but also just a great sounding board to me and a close personal friend. And with that, with all the listeners, I hope, this conversation was something that was insightful and something that you can actually learn something actionable from. But with that, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.